So today we're going to talk about trade and how buyers and sellers interact with each other and how that interaction affects not only each one of them in particular, but also society as a whole. The place where buyers and sellers meet, whether physically as in the old times or virtually as many times happens today, is called the market. And we have seen it evolve from a very small place where people just bartered goods and services with each other to now very complex markets like the financial market, the stock market, where millions of people participate, connected through an intricate network of communication, transportation, and regulations. Today we'll focus exclusively on the fundamentals of what markets provide to those who participate in them. And to answer this question, we'll have to learn some of the way of thinking that economists use, some of the models and tools that we use. And what do I mean by a model? It's a simplified representation of reality that allows us to better answer the questions that we are interested in solving. So for example, if you want to go to the grocery store or to the movie theater in town, you would consult a map, perhaps on your smartphone, perhaps on paper, and the map would concentrate on the streets you need to get over there. Perhaps the streets will be represented as lines. The direction you need to take on the smartphone may be represented by a virtual arrow. But if, for example, if you wanted to go to another city, then all the side streets would disappear and just the highways would be represented. So the extent to which the model connects to reality depends on the question you want to answer. That's why economists use models to understand reality. It is a simplified version. It does not contain the whole of reality, but it does allow us to capture reality in a manageable way, something that allows us to, as I said before, understand specific questions. So today we'll start by modeling consumer behavior, and we'll do it through a concept that economists call demand. Then we will model the behavior of sellers with a concept economists call supply. Then we'll put it both together in a market, and finally we'll try to get some answers with our models about the effects of trade. Let's start with consumer behavior. So there are many aspects of human decision making, and we're going to focus just on how consumers react to changes in prices and how much they purchase of a specific good or service. And we'll motivate this with an example. So imagine you and I are the only people in the room, and that we are locked in here for the next 2 hours of class, me teaching and you learning, and you're thirsty and you would love to have some water, but you forgot to bring some. Fortunately, I did bring with me 3 bottles of water. And perhaps for the right price, you might be able to convince me to part with one or more of them. So concentrate just on one of these bottles for now. So you haven't drunk anything, and think for a minute, in this situation, you will not be able to get out of here for 2 hours. How much would you be willing to pay for this water bottle? Think about it for a minute, write down your answer in your notebook, and then we'll compare it with an answer you'll give us later. So imagine that, in my example, we'll have your willingness to pay for the first bottle would be $1. So you would be willing to pay $1 for this one bottle of water. Fast forward a few minutes, you've drunk this water bottle, but you're still somewhat thirsty or feeling better. And now you want to try to purchase the second bottle from me. How much would you be willing to pay for this second bottle? And remember, the constraints are still in place. You still have to remain here for the rest of the 2 hours for the rest of the class. How much would you be willing to pay for this? Write it down, and then I'll ask you to compare those 2 numbers. What I would be willing to bet is that the second number, the second willingness to pay for the second water bottle, was lower than for the first. So more likely than not, the first bottle was the one you wanted most. Once you have drunk that first water bottle, then probably your willingness to pay for the second bottle might be something like 50 cents. Your numbers may differ from mine, but in general what economists observe is that the more you consume of a product, the lower you are willing to pay. Then at that point you might say, well, I've drunk enough, I have to be locked in here for until the end of class, and all that water you have drunk is accumulating, so your willingness to pay for the third bottle might even be as low as 0. Now, what economists call this phenomenon, this universal phenomenon that you see for almost any person and almost any good, is the diminishing marginal utility. It's just telling you that as you consume more and more of one good, the utility of that good for you goes down. And economists love using math. We're not going to use math today, but we also love using graphs. And we are going to try to graph these numbers in a simple graph with just price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. On the horizontal axis, we have our 3 bottles, 1, 2, and 3. On the vertical axis, we have a dollar value, like for example, $1, 50 cents. And then we can plot just our example. The data that we used was $1 for the first bottle. That would be the willingness to pay for the first bottle. For the second bottle, willingness to pay was just 50 cents. And remember that your own numbers, your preferences may be different. And for the third one, you wouldn't be willing to pay anything at all, price of 0. Now, this phenomenon shows the diminishing marginal utility in graphical way. Now, the question is, how would you behave as a consumer depending on what market price? So perhaps if I'm the one who has the water bottles, if I tell you, for example, I'm willing to part with one bottle for $2, would you be willing to purchase one or not? And you would compare your willingness to pay $1 with the $2 price, and you will not want to buy at that price. For any price above $1, about how much you value that first water bottle, your demand will be 0. So that is for any price above $1. If I lower the price enough to $1 or below, then you will jump and start consuming. You'll buy the first bottle from me for any price between 50 cents and $1. If I lower the price even further, below 50 cents, then your demand, how much you buy of a specific product, in this case water bottles, you will increase to 2. So this is if the price is less than 50 cents. Now, this demand curve for one individual student in one specific situation looks a little funny. It still shows kind of the downward sloping shape that reflects the diminishing marginal utility. But imagine that we have millions of consumers, millions and millions of water bottles in a market, and what we have is that this downward sloping demand that now looks a little jagged will become much smoother. You will have, again, our price and quantity. It will look much more like a simple line. And what that demand represents is that for each price, the higher the price, so if you're up here, the lower the quantity that consumers will demand of that particular product. That is something that you can observe in reality. It's not just an abstract theoretical model. It's something that economists, as scientists, do. We have predictions, our models have predictions. We go out in reality and we observe. We make observations about how people react to changes in prices, and everything else being equal. That means with no changes in income, no changes in the number of people in the market, and so forth. If the only variable that you change is price, then in reality we do observe over and over again that the quantity demanded decreases. Now that we have our demand down, or at least part of it, let's turn our attention to the behavior of the sellers. And in the context of the same example, I would be the seller. I brought, as I mentioned before, 3 water bottles. Let's say you want to buy one water bottle for me. I would offer you the one that I use as a backup, since I'd never use it, so it has very low, it's I'm not sacrificing much by giving it to you. So economists would say it has a low opportunity cost. So perhaps I would be willing to sell this first bottle to you, willingness to sell now instead of willingness to buy, for just 50 cents. Now, if you wanted to buy the second bottle from me, now it's causing me kind of second thoughts, because I many times do end up drinking this second